So I was just comparing the potential output of today's session and then the output that we have from yesterday's session. This is what the initial page looks like will look like when you complete the entire thing, and we are already at that point. So according to the HTML and CSS part, we've covered a very long way. Okay, so the final output, structurally looking and the aesthetic aspect, is done using HTML and CSS. Now all that is remaining is giving the functionality to this website. So if you see our current website, if I type something here and hit submit, nothing is going to work. Okay, because it doesn't know what to do. It doesn't know what a submit button should do. It doesn't know what the input box should do. All that it knows is the input box is here to take input from the user. That's all that it knows. But we are going to be converting the same app that we have into doing this, which is when you hit submit, it should create a card over here and put it there. Okay, if you want to do something else, good evening maybe. So it keeps, tacking it on and on and on. So that's the functionality that we are going to be giving today. How is that possible? And this is where the third main pillar of front-end web development comes in, which is JavaScript. So JavaScript is basically it's basically a programming language which runs on the browser. Okay, you can use JavaScript to tell what has to be taken from the structure that you've built and what has to happen to the information that's obtained from the website to the future, through the life cycle of the data that you have. So the intention that we have is, if somebody fills something in the input box here, your name, and somebody fills something for the greeting message and hits submit, it has to first obtain that data. This is step one. Step two is to create a card. The black color, the dark themed card that you have to the right, that has to get created. Step three is to feed the data that you already had into appropriate fields over here. This is the green color thing is greet name that we built yesterday. And the actual message is greet-message from the card that we built. If I have to show you if I have to show you the example here, oh wait, do we have any doubts? Okay, so that happens, and if there's any doubt, okay, you just throw it you can put it in the chat that we have here, and I will try my best to get it sorted for you. Okay, right. So the first point is obtaining the data. Second point is to create the card to the right. Third point is to feed that data into the card. And this keeps going on and on and on for the new message, for each time the submit button is clicked. Let's say your user, there are edge cases that you should think of. Okay, what if the user comes and then simply hits the submit button? That's a problem, right? So your program should also cover that edge scenario into creating a window and shouting back at the user saying that both are required fields. So even if you leave one of them unattended, one of them empty, the same message has to come. Both are required fields. Okay. So simple. You're going to the program you're going to write will take data, point one. Point two is that it will be able to create new cards. Point three, it will be able to tell back at the user saying that they haven't entered all the fields. All these three will be covered today. So let's get back to the code. So now we are going to be talking about JavaScript. Okay, so that means that, like how we separated the CSS code into its own file, we are going to be creating a JavaScript file where the JavaScript code that you're going to write is going to live in. So go ahead and create a file called main.js. .js is the file extension for JavaScript files, and we are calling it main.js. Okay. Once that is done, like yesterday, what we had used this link tag to link that particular style sheet, right? The CSS file that you had written. We are going to be doing a similar thing today also, because your main.js is there, but your HTML file is the entry point, the home page, and that file still doesn't know that it has to take information from your JavaScript file. So we need to link it. How do we do that? We use the script tag. Okay, JavaScript. So it's going to stand for script. So we are going to be using the script tag. With the script tag, okay. So will we use it to the black? Okay, right. That's a good notion, Krishnendu. You seem to be informed about it already. But we are going to take a slightly different approach. This is a very good approach, but we are going to be taking a slightly different approach into creating those black color cards. Okay, I'll show you that. So we're going to be loading the script tag. Script comes first. We are going to use the source attribute, src attribute, to tell where your main.js file is living in. It's called main.js. And then you need to use this keyword called defer, D-E-F-E-R. Now, what this means is that I want to load the JS file only after my website is rendered. Okay, I'll have to explain this a bit for you. You need to, pay key attention to this because it's a slightly important concept that you need to know. When I don't put the defer attribute here, what it means is that, as I told you, these are instructions for the browser. The head tag will get immediately executed as soon as your homepage comes into action. All right. So what it will do is it will load the main.js file automatically. But the problem would be that when the main.js file got loaded, the browser wouldn't have built your website, built the structure that has to come underneath. Okay, because it needs its own time, right? It's again a program. Browser, it's a program, and the HTML and CSS structures that you mentioned in your program. So when I put the defer keyword, it is like telling the browser that, okay, you have to load main.js, but don't do it yet. First, build the structure that I gave you underneath in the body, build my website first, and then run the main.js file. So at that point, your main.js file will know what boxes exist, what input boxes exist, what buttons exist, the submit button, etc. Okay, that's the importance of the defer keyword. So it will load it, but execution will be it will wait for the execution until the entire website is built. So it best knows what the context of the website is. Okay. So we've done that. Now we've linked like what we did yesterday for the style.css, we've now linked the main.js file. Now we have to start typing out the JavaScript file. Okay. So we'll split it up into steps. Okay. So step one is to capture the elements of the website. This is step one. Step two is to take the data from the captured elements. Okay, let's talk about these two steps first, and then let's proceed further. In the meantime, do we have some doubts? Okay, right. So step one is to capture the elements of the website. What do I mean by capture the elements of the website? So in your website, you know that this particular thing exists. The input box exists, the greeting message text area exists, the button exists. But the issue is that now we have to, JavaScript has to know that, okay? Now your HTML file knows that there's a JavaScript file. It is going to execute. Okay. But it's also very important that your JavaScript file knows what the elements that are on your website, okay? Give me one moment. There's a slight distraction here. Yeah. So it's very important that the JavaScript file that you're writing knows what the boxes here mean, okay? They have to be captured because you're going to be taking data from this box. What if there are multiple text boxes? I want to take my name from the very first text box here. That's what I want the JavaScript file to do. So for that, you need to write a code line that will take it, that will obtain from the particular HTML script, that HTML file that you've written. So how do you do that? You need to create a variable first. Okay, let's call it the name input. Okay, const name input. It's going to be a constant that I'm writing. And you have, the convention is that you start with writing document. So document is basically the HTML file. Okay, just keep it as simple as what the meaning of document has to be considered to be very simple. Document here just means the HTML file that you've written. And from the document, what am I going to do? I'm going to get elements, and VS Code suggests you what it is. Get elements by class name. This is one approach, but there's a different approach that I'd like to suggest because you have already learned CSS, and there's a small CSS way of introducing all this here. Okay, we can use the function query selector. Okay, CSS has this thing, right, where you can select using the selectors that I had taught you yesterday. Dot means selecting a class. Hash means selecting a ID, selecting an ID from the HTML file. So we can use the same thing as we used in CSS yesterday with JavaScript also, using this function called query selector. What query selector does is that it opens a function block. It takes an input using quotes. You can write the same query selector command that you had, a query selector that you had used yesterday with CSS. So we are going to be capturing the name field. And what is the name field? It is name hyphen input. So was it understandable so far? I'd like to take responses from you so we can move further. Can I see some thumbs if it's fine? If there are questions, please stop me here and we have to solve that, because after this point, it should be easy. If you understand everything so far, then beyond this point, it should be fine. Okay, looks like we don't have any questions. Let's proceed. Cool. So we've captured the name input field now. Okay, we haven't taken the data yet, but we've it's like attaching a fish. It's like attaching a fish, to a fishing. In the activity of fishing, you usually keep the bait, right? It's like you've kept the bait now. Now it's your turn to do the actual fishing and then take the data from it. We are going to that part very soon. So why not document.getElement by ID? That's a very good question. The reason that by using any ID, okay, right. We are going to be selecting, if you see the code that we wrote yesterday, we've given a class for the name input. If you see it here, look at the input box. I have it named as name input, name hyphen input. If I had it written as ID equal to name input, then get element by ID would work. And I could also use the same query selector function. Instead of the dot, I would just use a hash if I had used ID instead. But since we are talking classes here, since we had given the name input as class yesterday, we are using the dot selector, using the query selector function. Did that make sense? Okay, awesome. Right. So we've captured the first element, which is name input. Now let's move into capturing the second element, which is your second text box. What is it? It's the greetings input, the message input, basically. Greeting message input. So for that, we are going to be using query selector dot message input. Okay. So again, we've like anchored on the second input box. Now it's like this particular variable, message underscore input is watching for changes in it. Can people go on mute, please? Thank you. Right. So the first two things are done. Now it's also key that we capture the submit button, because you need to tell what happens when the submit button is clicked, right? So we'll also capture that using const submit btn. Submit button is equal to, again, from the HTML document, which is document dot query selector. It's the submit button. I gave it the class of submit-button yesterday. So I'm using the dot selector here. All right. We also have another small thing. Okay. We have three elements which were of key interest for us to capture, which are the input box number one, which are input boxes number one, number two, and the submit button. There's also a fourth element we are keen to know about. That is the section two. Okay. Particularly greet responses. If I show you the code from yesterday, look at this. Our section two, div named section two, has the word another div that says greet responses. So greet responses is the place where we are going to be creating those black color cards into. Okay. So we are going to be manipulating that also, right? So we wait for that particular div. How do we do that? We have to capture that thing first. So you capture to do anything. So this capture process will hold true for doing anything that you want to the captured resource. If I want to take data from the captured resource, I have to capture it using query selector. If I want to put data into that, again, I have to capture it. Whatever I want to do, whatever I want to manipulate to that particular element, I will have to capture it first. So the capture process is again the same thing, but for greeting responses. Okay. So how do I do that? Const greet responses is equal to, again, document dot. I can use query selector here, or like Krishnendu first told. I think it was Krishnendu. I'm not sure. Oh yeah, see Krishnendu, get element by ID. You can use either of those. I'm going to be using query selector for the moment. Since it's an ID that I've used instead of classes, I'm using the hash selector this time. So I can explain you both of those. Okay. Yesterday, if you see here, div has an ID of class, ID of greet responses, and not class of greet responses. So what I do is I'm using the hash selector, same thing as CSS that we were discussing about yesterday. So step one of capturing the elements of the website is successfully done now. Moving on, now we have to take the data from the captured elements. But before that, we have to tell all that I want to do happens at one particular event. Okay. And what is that event? Clicking the submit button. Okay. That's where everything starts. If I simply type it down here, nothing's going to happen. Only when I click that particular resource of submit, the button, submit button, something happens. That is, it takes the data from the particular input box and then feeds it into the section two with greet responses ID, the div with the ID holding greet responses as value. So the key thing here is everything. So when things start happening, when you click the particular button. So it's called an event. In the world of JavaScript, we call these things as events. Okay. An event is basically a thing that happens on the website, a change that happens to the website. So what is a possible change? The very fact that you are typing something here is an event. The very fact that you're deleting something here is an event. The fact that you're moving your mouse on the website is an event. The fact that you're putting your mouse over a resource is an event. The fact that you're taking your mouse away from the resource is an event. Similarly, the fact that you're clicking a resource is an event. Okay. Did that make sense? Can I see thumbs up if that makes sense? What an event is. Okay. Sounds good. So again, an event is basically something that happens to your website, okay, done by the user. So the user is going to be clicking the particular resource, the submit button, okay. So when we click the particular resource, the submit button, we want all this to happen. That is taking the data from this, creating a card, feeding the data into the card, and then putting the card in the greet responses page. All this happens when I click the particular resource, the submit button. So in JavaScript, we have something called the event listener, add event listener function. So instead of step two being that, let's keep it aside for the moment. Let's say step two as set up an event listener for submit button. Okay, how do we do that? We captured it, right? Already, the submit button in the variable submit btn. So submit btn dot add event listener, open the function. It takes two arguments. Okay. The first argument is what the event is. We are capturing a click event, right? So it's called the click event. Add event listener, click event, comma. It takes a function. The second parameter is a function. In the world of programming languages, a function is basically a set of rules that get triggered when a particular event happens. Okay, like a function call, or here it's the click event. So I'm telling to the submit button, I'm attaching an event listener for the click event. And when that happens, I'm telling after a comma, I want you to execute this function. This is the syntax. The keyword function followed by parenthesis opened and closed, followed by curly braces opened and closed. Inside this block, whatever I write, that is going to happen when I click that button. Okay. For now, I will make a small demonstration showing you this particular event in action. For that, we have a function called alert in JavaScript. Alert is basically that small pop-up box that you saw. Okay. Whatever message I write inside this alert function, that will show up on the browser screen when the particular event happens. So alert, and then I can say your message, or let's say like let's have some fun with this. Like saying you have been hacked. Okay, it's a small message that I'm putting. So if I go back to my page and click this button, see, we have that alert box. You have been hacked. So that was the demonstration of the click event listener. Now what we should do is we have to take the elements, the value of these elements. We've set up the boxes, right? We've captured the boxes. But at this point, we still don't know what the value that it has. How do we do that? We create another variable called name. Name is the actual value, right? Name input was just the input box that we captured first. But now name is going to be the actual value that is held in by the input box. So for that, you use the name input, the captured resource, the input box itself, and say dot value. Okay. That is the value held by that particular resource, the name input box. Similarly, we are going to capture the message. How does that happen? Again, you use the captured resource and then say dot value. So now the constants name and message will contain the values that are held in that particular resource. Okay. Now what we do is, so this is the step that happened here. Step 3 was captured elements. Now what we're going to do is we are going to write an if condition. Okay. It's very similar to the other programming languages that you might know, like Python, C, C++, everything. There are if conditions that you can write here. So if, sorry, I have a bad throat today. If name.length is greater than 0, and what I'm trying to tell here is that name shouldn't be empty. Name's length has to be greater than 0. All right. And the message, the value of message dot length is greater than 0. Again, open a block here and tell what has to happen. Okay. But before that, we'll write the else condition. You know what the else condition is, right? When I use the double and symbol here, it means that both conditions have to be satisfied for it to go into this block here. Okay. If it has to come into that particular block, then all these conditions, that is both these conditions, name length being greater than 0 and message length being greater than 0, has to be satisfied. If either of these conditions fail, then it will immediately come into the failure block. This is the place where we are trapping the user. If the user doesn't type any value for one of these boxes, we are putting that message, right? That alert message saying both are required fields. This is where that happens. We are alerting the user saying both are required fields. Okay. Did that make sense? Can I see thumbs up? Awesome. Okay. Krishnendu, so your
Can you
question.
please explain again?
Yes. Come again? What do you want to be explained? What do you want to have explained?
If else, if else, both of.
If else. Yeah, sure. So there's this concept, there's in the programming paradigms, there's this concept called if. These are called conditionals, basically. Okay. You're telling it to take a multiple, asking the program to take other courses of action when a particular condition is satisfied or fails. So what I'm telling here is that if open a parenthesis and I'm writing the conditions list, with a separator called these logical and this is called a logical and. Okay. The and condition means I want both these conditions to be satisfied. Okay. For it to satisfy this particular success block, I'll call it the success block. For things that you see in the success block to be executed, I'm telling if you see that both these conditions are the length, and the length, then the success block ends. Otherwise, or else, go into the field. This is what the if and else keywords mean here. I hope you understood that.
Yes. Yes, sir. Understand.
I'll click submit. Okay, yeah, sure. Yep, yeah. So Krishnendu's question here is that why can't you use on-click submit instead? So see, Krishnendu, it's a very good approach. Am I audible? Can you hear me? I had a brief network outage. Can you see some thumbs if I'm audible there?
Yes, definitely.
Hello. Ah,
Yes, sir, you're audible.
so yeah. So we can use on-click submit also, but yeah, sure. The reason that I used add event listener is because I wanted the people here to understand what an event basically is. So with add event listener, you can assign a particular event listener to any resource. I understand that it doesn't run in some browsers, but then it's basically the older versions of browsers. Okay. On click is very tightly coupled to a button or to the resource where it's very tightly coupled. And when you start bloating your HTML script, the code readability is lost. Okay. What you see, the HTML file keeps growing, and then if you want to debug the code tomorrow, then it's going to be a problem. This on-click submit, for people that don't understand where that is written, is that it's written in the HTML file itself as an attribute. But let's not confuse with that. Let's just stick on to add event listener for the moment. Okay. So the failure block, we've given it to throw an alert saying both are required fields. Coming to the success block, where we are actually going to take we've already taken the values. Now we are going to be manipulating the fields that we have with the values that we've obtained so far. Okay. How are we going to do that? So this is where you are going to be creating that card and then putting that. So I'll write it here. Okay, you are going to create the black card and insert it to the greet responses. Okay, that's what's going to happen. So I'm telling now this particular case is fine because I found that name's length and message's length is greater than 0 because the person has typed something inside there. So I'm telling greet responses dot, we have a function, we have a small attribute here called the inner HTML attribute. So whatever I write followed by this will get fed into the particular, the greet response. So I'll tell you what inner HTML means. You have this div here, right? It's an opening and closing block. At the moment, everything inside, we don't have anything inside. This is empty for the moment. Empty. That's because at the start of the application, you don't want anything to be seen inside the particular div element. Because if I had something written here, like say I put a h1 saying good day. If I do something of that sort, when people come to the website itself, they'll start seeing something. But that's not what I want to happen. What I want instead is that it has to stay empty in the beginning. But as people start typing something and then they create these cards, it gets fed into the particular box instead. Okay, that's the requirement that I have. So I'll say whatever comes after this dot in the HTML to that particular captured element, the greet responses, that will get fed dynamically. So when the click event happens, see where I'm writing this function. I'm writing all these text inside the function that should get triggered when the click event happens. So only when a person clicks the particular button with something written there, I want the inner HTML of the greet responses div to get bloated, to get filled up. So here I'm going to be writing the HTML. So what happens is that I can write a HTML here. If I write that HTML instead of writing HTML directly in the HTML file, if I write it here, greetings, good day. If I write it here instead, this will get fed into the particular div element only after the click event happens. Okay, now let's see a demo. So what I did is that I say greet responses.innerHTML is equal to that particular HTML line, h1 greetings good day. So let's say I'm typing randomly something because this has to get satisfied, right? It has to go into the input, the if condition. It has to go to the success block. I write something and I do a click, see what happened. It dynamically got fed into your particular HTML file. It's like injecting data after the click event happens. This is happening dynamically. This is the power of JavaScript. Now it's happening dynamically, right? Only based on your request, when you click the button, this got added in. Okay. I hope that made sense. So let's proceed into creating the card. So inner HTML, inside the inner HTML block, I can write any HTML script, any HTML markup. Okay, if I create a HTML markup, so the H1 that I just wrote is a HTML markup. When I wrote that, that got injected into the greet responses development. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to create that div card element. Yesterday in CSS, when you observed, we created that div card element, right? Div class card, and then the greet name, greet message inside that. That's what is going to happen now. So how do we do that? So if I say equal to here, then it's a problem. I'll tell you what the problem is later on, but let's see it for now. I'm going to create a div here. Okay. I think it's a good time, so that it's a good time for us to take some doubts here, because at this point you will have a bunch of questions, I believe. Can we take those questions now? Does anybody have any question? We are actually about to achieve the functionality. Okay, Krishnanda already has the hint given here. That's what we'll be using. Do we have any questions here? If we have any questions, let's take it up. Else we can proceed. Okay, looks okay. So instead of quotes here, okay, you see this red color, all these errors showing up, right? Because I came into a new line and then I'm doing all that stuff. So instead of using the normal quotes convention, JavaScript has a separate convention using backticks. The symbol here is called backticks. Okay, if you can see it here, it is present above your tab key on the keyboard. Okay, it's called a backtick. I'll tell you the purpose of using a backtick instead of the normal quotes that we are aware of. The normal quotes, you saw when I used normal quotes, there were a bunch of errors, right? Because I want to make my code look a bit more better by using multiple lines to put the same thing. But that is not achievable using quotes because it expects everything to come in one line. But backticks instead gives me that extra functionality where I write and still be error free. That's what a backtick does. This is the first advantage. But the most important advantage is that I can bloat it with, I can do the data injection. Okay, putting the data, the name and message was obtained, right? So this has to go into the div element. How do we do that? Using backticks. So we'll first create that structure like we did yesterday on the HTML file. Instead, we are doing it with the JavaScript file here because this has to get dynamically inserted. Okay. So I want a div first. I want another div for the message. The first div inside the first div is to create that card, that black color card. The first div inside the black color card will contain the name. The second div inside it will contain the message. All right. With that in mind, we'll into the particular div. I want the class of card to be given. Why am I doing this? When I say class of card should be given to this dynamically created card, it's because that I've written my rules already in the CSS file. If you see the CSS file, we have rules written for dot card, class card, with the background color of this, the blackish color, the padding, the border radius, the gap, everything has been given already by us yesterday. So I'm using the same class. So when I dynamically insert it, it will obtain the CSS features that we had written it yesterday for aesthetics. So that is for the card. Then we give it for the name. What is it? It is greet name. Okay, if you see the CSS file that we wrote yesterday, all this is written there already, which is why we are reusing the same thing. Second one is greet message. Okay, now that is done. Now it's time for us to put the actual data inside this. So whatever I write here, hello and the world thing, if I write whatever I write here is going to appear in the HTML file. But here I'm hard coding it. But what do I want to be seen here is the name and the message values that I've taken from the elements, the input boxes. How do you do that? Now that I used backticks here, convention says that I can use dollar followed by opening and closing braces to put the variable itself inside. Okay. Instead of hard coding hello and world there, what I'm doing is I'm putting a dollar sign, opening and closing braces to put the variables that I already have, which is name and message. Okay. That's it. We are done now. If I have to show you what happens when we do that, let's type a name here. I'll type Sudai. Hello world. When I click submit, look at what just happened. I'm creating the card, then I'm creating two divs inside. Then I'm injecting the values that I took from these input boxes and I inserted dynamically into the particular fields. Instead of using the backticks followed by the dollar and braces convention, if I had hard coded something here, let's say I'll show you the difference here. So first I'm hard coding it for the name, and then I'm not hard coding anything. Instead, I'm using this dynamically inserting approach here for the message. When you do that, look at what happens. Instead of Sudai, it put hello there. Why? Because I had hard coded it. Instead of hard coding, I'm using a dollar followed by name braces and the variable's name inside the braces. When I do that, it has the desired approach. All right. Now it works fine. But there's a small issue with, there's a small difference. Instead of an issue, I would say it's a difference with the app that we have here and the one that we've been building so far. If I type something here and then I type the words hello and world, enter a greeting message and hit submit, look at what happens. It creates the card as our app is doing for the moment. But instead, it is also clearing the fields up here. Okay, so it's ready to take in the next message the user wants to type. But look at our app. How many times I click it here? If I say hello world, if I click submit, look at what happens. The card is there, but then this is not getting erased. That's a problem. So how do we erase it when the person clicks it and the data has been already injected? Now, that's this last step. Clear the input boxes. I want to clear the input boxes, right? When the clicking is done and when the card is created, the data doesn't have to be there anymore. I want it to go away. How do I do that? Name input, which is the input box that we captured, dot value, and you assign it to an empty string, empty quotes. That's it. So message input dot value is equal to empty string. Now look at it. Now it should work fine. So by hello, you click submit. See, it's ready to take in the next message now. It is clearing it up for us. So we've solved one issue now. Now we actually have a persisting issue. If I type something else next, another message next, and hit submit, look at what happens to this card itself. Instead of adding a card next, it is simply changing the card. That is not what I want. What I want instead is that these tags, these cards have to get tagged upon each other. I want to create a list of these cards, but instead it's just replacing the existing card. That is because when I did greet responses.inner HTML is equal to, when I create the equal to sign, when I use the equal to sign here, what it means is that when I click it, assign it simply to whatever you have here. It is assigning it. It's not adding it to what it already has. So for that, what we do is we use a JavaScript shorthand called plus equal to. What plus equal to means is that what a shorthand basically means is instead of creating a variable and then adding to it, it simply adds it on to the value that is already contained by the inner HTML of greet responses. Okay, so instead of assigning it to something new, now I'm telling it to add to what you already had. Greet responses.inner HTML already had this first card. Now I'm telling it to add this new card. That's why the plus equal to add this new card to the value it already has in the inner HTML. So it's the same as telling temp is equal to like 88, then temp equal to temp plus 5. Okay, in the normal world of programming languages, instead of doing this, instead of writing this line number 23, with programming languages, you can use these shorthands. It's the same as writing, okay? This is the same as writing temp plus equal to 5. That's exactly what we did. Instead of instead of writing 2 lines, I had it all written in 1 line using a shorthand. Read responses.inner HTML plus equal to the new card that I'm building. Instead of using a shorthand, if I had to use the normal equal to sign, then I would have written it in this convention. Read responses.inner HTML is equal to, if I could have done this instead, card is equal to the card that I had created. Okay, I could have written that, and then I could have written greet responses.inner HTML is equal to greet responses.inner HTML plus card. I could have done this, but the code looks kind of, to achieve the same result, I have to write too many lines of code, right? That is where a shorthand comes into action. Instead of writing too many lines like that, I say use the plus equal to operator, which is a JavaScript shorthand, to just add this card to the inner HTML that is already present. Okay, I hope that made sense. Now our functionality should have been achieved. If I type something here and hit submit, the card is created. And the next time I create something here, it gets added on to to the amount of cards that are already present in the inner HTML contained by greet responses. So did I make sense so far? Can backticks be used only in JS or HTML file too? Yeah, Rahul, that is to be used only in JS. JavaScript supports the backticks convention, not HTML. Okay. Can I see some thumbs up if you are able to follow so far? Awesome. Great. And to test out that failure condition, you can always just go ahead and click submit simply, and then it will say both are required fields. And just like that, see, our app now looks very similar to what you are supposed to build. We are already done. The entire app is done. Okay. All right. So now let's take a moment and talk about backend in brief. Okay. Do we have any problems with front end so far? All that we've, okay. How can I add clear all button that removes all the cards from reading responses? Awesome. That's a good question. Oh, nice. We can code that now. We can, it's 7 o'clock. Let's take a while to code this functionality. Okay. Our original app doesn't have that, but let's create this new functionality. So let's call S clear all cards function. For that, first step is to create that button. That button isn't there, right, in our HTML file. So we need to create that button. How do you do that? It's going to remain after our submit button. Okay. So we'll call it button type submit. That's all fine. Instead of submit button, let's call it clear button. And inside the button, let's ask it to read clear all cards. All right. And if we go on to the output, we have the clear all cards button. If you want to apply some styles to it, we can always come back here. Since it's very similar to our submit button, I'm just going to copy the block of code that we've written for submit button already. And I will just change the color instead. Okay. Instead of submit button, I'm going to call it the clear button. Instead of orange, let's just use red. Okay. So the styles are now complete. Clear all cards, submit. So we're done with that. Now the step is to capture that first. So const clear btn is equal to document dot query selector dot clear button. Now we've captured the button. Now we are going to add an event listener, because what I want, the intention is that when I click that button, the cards have to get cleared. So clear button dot add event listener. It's a click event. What should it do? It has to trigger this function. Open the block. Here, we've already captured the greet responses div. Now we are just going to reset it. Okay, so how do we do that? Greet responses dot inner HTML. Initially, what we did is that we tagged on these new cards that we create to the cards that are already there using the plus equal to sign. But now we are going to reset it. So how do you do that? Greet responses.inner HTML. I'm going to assign it using the equal sign to an empty string. There should be nothing inside that. So all the cards that are there that I dynamically inserted should now disappear. So I'm telling, take yourself an empty string value instead. That's it. So the hello world. If I hit submit, it creates it. Pregrad. Hello evening. If I say submit, it gets created. Now I press clear all cards, all that is vanished. So did that make sense? Is that fine? Did everybody understand this feature that we quickly added? I did not have this feature ready from yesterday. Now that Aviral here asked us for this feature, we were able to dynamically insert it. Okay, we've just added a new feature in no time to our app. Awesome. Now let's take a small brief moment to talk about what backend can do. So what we discussed so far, yesterday we spoke about HTML, then we spoke about CSS. So HTML creates the structure for you. CSS gives you the aesthetics to the structure that you have given. And today we've discussed about can help you to manipulate the values that you have in the website that you have built. That's what we've discussed so far. But the major issue in our website now is that all this is temporary. Whatever I type here will be there. But when you're creating a greetings app, when you want to gift this particular app to a particular, to a friend or to a friend or a relative for the functions that they are hosting, this has to persist. When people do make greetings here, that has to be persistent. It has to stay there. But the issue in our app is that when you refresh it, it is all gone. So it doesn't really make any real world sense. We've taken the very first step. We've like completed 70% of the requirements where we've created the app. We've told it what it has to do. But in the real world, all the changes that we do, all the cards that we insert has to be persistent. It has to remain there, and that's the small problem that our app is currently facing. It doesn't have that for the moment. Whatever you do here will be short-lived. When you refresh the page or when somebody opens this website on their phone, they will see an empty app like this. They will not see the greetings. This is where the concept of backend will come in. So backend is basically used like it's basically used as a bridge to interface your front end to a server that is always running on cloud, or it could be running on your personal computer also. Okay. Before I talk about backend in further detail, just give me one moment so I can show you what this app can be. Okay, sir, I get errors in my code. Okay. Okay, let's get debugging that first. Can you share your screen instead? Is it possible? Geetika, can they share their screens?
Yes, they are allowed to share their screens. They can go with us.
Yes. Maybe we can take a moment to just debug their code. Looks like Dyaneshwar here has some errors in his code.
Sir, just give me a minute.
Yeah, sure. Can you please speed it up, Dyaneshwar, so we can talk about backend, so you can get a full-fledged view of the entire app by
Sir,
the closure.
just 2 minutes.
Okay.
Sir, it's visible.
Yes, yes, your code is visible. Your output is visible here. Cannot read properties of null. Reading add event listener. Okay. Right. Hmm. Okay, can you show me your code, the HTML file? Okay. Can you show the HTML file to me first? All right. So IQ is coming from
Sir, actually, I am not
assets.
added asset folder. I
Okay.
I don't add image in there. There
Okay.
there is an issue in
Uh,
main JSL.files. I think.
okay. Yeah. Can you show me main JS then? Okay. Yeah. You. Okay. Right. Okay. I know what the problem here is. I asked you to add the differ keyword, right? You haven't added that. It says it's seeing null over there because the website got built after the CS after your JS file ran. That's the issue. Your website has to get built first, and then your JavaScript file has to start looking at the resources that it wants to capture. But since you did not put the defer keyword, it started looking for those resources even before the website got built. So just add the defer keyword there. It should work.
What will you do?
Go to index.html and add the defer keyword. You've written script src, right?
Yes.
Followed by that, add the defer keyword, defer.
Where sir? In script tag. No?
No, there itself, just for after the quotes. After the quote, give a space and then write defer. No, after the quotes, not there, not there. After the main JS, main.js, then you've given a quote, right? Space, defer.
Defer na sir.
Defer, correct, defer. Yes. Now it should work. But the issue is that you spelled it all wrong. Can you go to your JS file? The spellings are wrong. Go to your JavaScript file. It's not in the query selector. You have given name underscore input, but the class we've given there is name hyphen input. Similarly for message input, first line, your very first line,
This
it is
one sir.
name hyphen. Yes, that is name hyphen input. Similarly for message input, it's again message hyphen input.
So line
Yeah,
number
and your
12.
greet responses. Line number 5 also there's a problem. No, no, not all the underscores. Those are fine. Those have to be, those are variable names basically. Okay, so that you're free to name anything, but then what you write inside the class selector should be, query selector has to be correct.
Sir, it's okay or not?
Yeah, now it's good. Line number 5, change it to greet responses. You've written geet responses. Your spellings have to be right side, right side. Spellings make a very big deal here. They have to be correct. Okay, I think you stopped your server, so hmm, yeah.
I think it's no.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Dhaneshwar. Let's now talk about backend
Thank you sir.
in brief. Yep, no problem. Let me reshare my screen now.
Sir, hello.
Yep. Yes, hello.
Sir, my message box is not get empty.
Your
I
message
keep
box is in
checking.
there. Okay, can we do the debugging a little bit later on? You
Yes
know,
sir. Okay, okay sir.
so
Okay, okay.
yeah, cool. I'll share my screen now. So I have built a version with backend. Okay, we'll not be talking about it in detail, but I'll show you how the backend can be useful when you learn it. Okay, it's the same app, but the difference that I've made to it is that I have a server running. Okay, On the background, in the background, I have a particular server that I've written, and that is running, and in turn, that is connected to a database. Okay. So what happens? The difference between your app, the app that we've built so far, and the app that I have here is that this one, after creating the card, okay, it will send a command to the backend. Okay, it will set. So it's basically called an API. Okay. So an API is like let's consider an analogy here. Let's take an analogy of you going to a hotel. You're going to a hotel, you order something, you see the menu, you order something, and who do you place the order to? To the waiter. The waiter in turn takes it to the kitchen, the order that you place to the kitchen. Waiter tells the order in the kitchen, it gets prepared, it comes back to you. How does it come back to you? The waiter again brings it back to you. This is the sequence that happens in a restaurant if you visit. This is very similar to the backend concept. What our app here does is that the app here, the front end is the customer. The API is the waiter. That is the backend basically. Okay, the backend exposes certain API. API is basically application programming interface. Okay, if you Google API, you can understand what it is. Application programming interface. So if I take a picture here, yeah, look, the customer here is the web app. Okay, in the browser, it's the front end that you've built, and then the API acts as the that is exposed by the particular backend server that we've written. Then behind that sits the database. Okay. So when you click the submit button, we have an extra action that's happening. The API is used to send a request to the backend, who in turn creates an entry in the database. Okay. So when I type something here, when I say good day and hit submit, I'm sending a request to the backend, and the backend, that is the kitchen, and the kitchen is now making an entry on the database saying that the name is good and the greeting is day. When that happens, it is created, an entry is made in the database, and the database is always running, okay, on the cloud or on your machine. Here in this case, it's running on my machine. The database is created, and the data that the words good and day is saved in the database. So when I come and refresh this app the next time, instead of showing me an empty instead of saying greet responses as an empty div, it rather goes back to the database, asks the database, do you have any entries for me already? And the database will reply back. The database via the API will return back a response saying, no, you are not supposed to show empty things. I already have people who have given me these greetings so far. I already saved it on my database. So instead of showing an empty space over there, I'll give you these three things. You can show them as cards. That's what the API will return back to me as response. When I ask it, do you have something for me already? Okay. The API will reply back saying that, no, don't show something, don't show empty stuff. Rather, show the things that I already have saved for you, saved greetings for you. Did this concept make sense? Can I have a yes if that was understandable? If not, we can talk in further detail about it. Because this is where your app is eventually headed. Okay, that's the whole purpose of building the app, right? When you refresh the page, all this is staying. But in the app that we've built so far, and I refresh it, it will go away. But it's a very small change. Okay, when I create the backend, and then when I properly interface my front end, that is the customer with the backend, the kitchen, through the API, who is the waiter, when I properly orchestrate the responses and requests that happen between these two entities, your app becomes robust. Your app becomes final. It takes the final shape. So in this app, when you refresh, it is gone because all that we have is this front end. That is, you're just a customer there. You're just talking to yourself. But in the second version of the app, we have a backend also. We also have a kitchen to whom you can talk to, and then to whom you can save new greetings, and then to whom you can ask for greetings that they already have the backend on the database. All right. So that's what a day a backend. So I think Pregrad would be organizing an event for you, teaching backend also separately. But then for the moment, we are very well done with front end with an extra feature that even the final app doesn't have, the clear all cards functionality. Look, our final app doesn't have that, but Avail here asked us for this extra feature and we were able to code it on the spot. That's what makes you good developers. You're able to think of what other functionalities can be added and you are able to implement such functionality in no time. So we had that goal in mind when we started and we've perfectly attained that goal. Now all that is remaining is to delve a bit deeper and discuss about backend to understand backend in further detail, which we will not be doing now. And then the most important, uh, you know, trait in a developer is the skills of debugging. So you were able to think of a new feature and then you were able to put it in. And since like how Dhyaneshwar is doing it here, we are debugging it. Debugging is what makes a good developer. You should be able to solve problems that you run into. Okay. That can be either done by using the right Google questions or asking the people that know what it is. So I highly encourage you people like Dhyaneshwar to come forward, show your screen. If you've been coding along, we can solve the issues that you might have run into to create this full-fledged app, at least for the front end. You can ignore the backend part. Backend doesn't matter for the moment, but I've just shown you what a potential backend can help you build the app, convert the app into. It takes a full form when you have a backend in place. So how many times I refresh this app, look at what happens. All the greetings are staying in their places. And question from Krishnendu. Sir, can I use an API instead of a Django? Okay, so Django is basically it's like JavaScript. Okay, it's basically written with Python, but it's a framework. It's more of a framework, Krishnendu. It's API is a concept. Django is a framework. Django is used to create APIs. Okay, you can use Node.js Express to create APIs. You can use Django to create APIs. You can use Flask to create APIs. But eventually, you're creating an API using all these frameworks. It's the concept of a waiter remains the same, but the names of waiters are only different, right? There might be 5 waiters in a particular hotel. They are all waiters only, but then they just have different names and different capabilities. But end of the day, they are all waiters. Okay, that's the entire concept here. The purpose of a waiter is to talk is to act like a bridge between you, the customer, and the chefs in the kitchen. Similarly, an API is here to act as that bridge between you, the front end, and the one behind that's the back end. All right. Django is a particular framework. API is a concept. Awesome. The time now is 7:24. We can take in some questions. Okay, difference between full stack developer and full stack engineer. Um, okay, that's you can ponder over that question, but I think that both are the same. Okay, full stack developer and full stack engineer. So when you're a full stack developer, again a full stack engineer, you will be able to build apps of this sort. When you're just a front end developer, your area of expertise will just lie in this stage. You have an app that is built, everything will live on the front end, but everything will be temporarily lived. But a full stack developer will also go one step forward to write code on the backend, servers on the backend, which will talk to databases, and then save the particular things that are coming. Say the particular requests that are coming from the user, which is the front end. Okay. A full stack developer takes care of both the front end and the back end, but a front end engineer takes care of just the front end, and the back end developer will take care just the back end. They will not come and interfere in the designs that you create, the functionalities that you put in the front end. They will not interfere with that. All that they are bothered about is to take data from you, the front end, and then put it in the database if they want to, and then return back responses to you accordingly. Full stack developers and full stack engineers, so on, will take care of both the features, that is creating the front end and the back end. They'll have informed knowledge about both the areas. That's the difference. All right. Okay, so now that we have some more time left, I'd like to explain one more concept to you. Okay, this is a very interesting one. Let's talk about hosting a bit. Okay, now that you've created a front-end application, the problem is that your front-end application now lives on your computer and only you will be able to see it. What if we can host it on a server and then ask the entire world to have a look at the front-end app that you've built? Okay, that is important, right? End of the day. Though you've created just a front-end app that has temporarily living data, it should be able to be seen around the world. So there's a service called Netlify. Okay, Netlify. Netlify is a service that allows you to take the app that you've built, the front-end app that you've built, and then host it in one particular place. Instead of your computer, we are going to be sending it to Netlify's computers, which live on the cloud. They are on 24/7. To such computers, when I send my app to them, they will keep it open to the world at all times. Okay. So I'd like to show a glimpse of how that works. So you can have a look at that. Give me one moment. I'll show you how that works. Cool. I hope you can see my screen now. Okay, I think we are live. So what we do is that we log into Netlify. You create an account on Netlify, okay? netlify.com. You create an account with Netlify, and then you'll be presented with a page that looks similar to this. Then you go on to add new site and deploy manually. Okay. After that is done, it is asking you to drag and drop your site output folder here. Okay. This is where you should drag and drop the folder that you have. What is it? In Pregrad workshop, I'm having this front end thing, right? This has my index HTML, main.js, and style CSS with the assets. So I simply drag these assets here and drop it into Netlify. I'm dropping the entire thing here. So when I do that, yesterday when we started talking, I told you that index.html is a peculiar name because browsers automatically know where to start, where the home page lives. Okay. So now that we've named our entry point file as index.html and we gave it to Netlify, Netlify here will automatically know that it has to start displaying websites from the index.html page. So just like that, it deployed it. It did the hosting part for us. When I click open production deploy, okay, looks like it hasn't deployed it yet, but it might take some time. Site is live. Okay. Something seems to have been broken. We'll see what it is. Okay. What seems to be the issue? Give me a second. Maybe it's the entire folder that I should give instead. Yep, that worked. Now see, the link looks different. This was 127.0.0.1.5:5500. That is on my computer, on my personal computer alone. But instead, look at this thing. It looks like an actual link that people can browse. So I'll just go ahead, paste this link in the chat box. If you people visit this link on your computer, you'll be able to see the app that I just built. And the same thing holds for you. You can also create it. You can also host it on Netlify such that everything is visible to the entire world. Yep. Is it working? The link that I pasted here, is that working for you people?